Good morning, everyone. We're going to make a start. Can I just check that those online can hear us, please?
You're fairly quiet, Bob.
Hey, fine.
Right, can I welcome you all to the Corporate and Resources Scrutiny Committee? I'm Councillor Phil, I'm Chairman of the committee. Just to remind everyone, the agenda pack with papers is available via Modyog and directly from the council website from the link that was sent out to members. Just remind you, when I invite someone to speak, could you clearly state who you are for the benefit of anyone who is listening to the meeting, so I can identify who is speaking, also to ensure that if you're in the room that you use your microphones, please. Just also to remind everyone that the meeting is audio recorded. Could I ask that anyone who's in the room can make sure that their mobiles are turned to silent or off, please, and online, if you could make sure that your cameras and microphones are off until we call you to speak, please. Agendas are now viewed electronically, so can I request that members and officers refer to page numbers from the public published agenda pack to assist all present in finding the appropriate information. I've also not been advised there's a planned fire drill this morning, but should this go off, please follow the Democratic Services officers and they'll lead you to the safe way out of the building. Thank you very much. So if we move to item 1 on the agenda, please, which is apologies for absence, and Mr. Jackson, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, committee. We have received apologies from Councillor Sorton, who's being substituted by Councillor Coles, Councillor Murphy, who's being substituted by Councillor Johnson. We have also, I understand Councillor Osborne is substituting for Councillor Trimnell. Apologies, Councillor Osborne, I only just found that out, so there's no nameplate sat there waiting for you. We've also had apologies from Councillor Smedley and also from Jason Vaughan, and Councillor Collins from the committee is online, Chair.
Thank you very much. Item 2 on our agenda is declarations of interest.
Chair, can I just interrupt you?
Councillor Chilcott.
Yeah, an email did come through very late from Councillor Ham. He's not very well this morning, so he apologises for the late apology.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll make a note of that.
Thank you, and certainly I'm sure the whole committee will send their best wishes to Councillor Ham. Item 2 is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations over and above standard declarations for members who are town and parish members? Okay. Item 3 is minutes of the previous meeting, which have been circulated to members. Are there any amendments to those? And if not, could I have a proposer that I sign them as a true and accurate record of the last meeting? Thank you very much. That's Councillor Lovell proposed. Is that seconded? Councillor Locke, thank you. All those in favour that I sign them, please show. That's clearly carried. That takes us to item 4, which is public question time. I've not been advised that we have any pre-submitted questions.
No, Chair, we do not.
Okay. Which then takes us on to the forward plan. And I think, Mr. Jackson, are you going to take us on to that?
I am, Chair. I'm very minded that the room is quite warm, so we have opened all the windows, and lo and behold, magically the streamers have appeared beneath us. So I'm hopeful they won't be too long. But if I suppose I'll just take a view of the committee because it is quite hard to hear. But okay, I'll just pull them close for a sec, Chair.
If you can just bear with us online, we're just going to try and soundproof the room a bit.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry about that. Members will see that the next meeting in their diaries for the Corporate and Resources Scrutiny is the 19th of June. We currently have 5 agenda items scheduled for that meeting, which include the LGR benefits, the Council Tax Reduction Scheme Review Consultation Plan, a draft of that, the disposal of non-operational assets, which was initially scheduled to be on this meeting's agenda but has been deferred to the June meeting, and potentially most importantly of all for this committee is the first budget monthly monitoring report. So that'll be the first opportunity for scrutiny to look at the budget monitoring this financial year. Just to highlight to members as well, we do also have a meeting in July, which is the 24th of July, which does unfortunately fall within the school holidays for those that may be affected by that. which includes myself, just so you know. But yes, so we will also have a meeting on the 24th of July. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. As you can see, that next meeting's agenda is already a pretty full agenda, so I'm sure there'll be a fair few papers for members to go through beforehand, and items that we can follow up. Any comments or questions that members have on the forward plan at present? I'm not seeing any, so thank you very much. That takes on to item 6 on our agenda, which is the gravity update, and I think Councillor Wyke, do you want to introduce this, and then we'll come to Mr. Green, who is also online.
Thank you. Yes, good morning, everyone. I have both my colleagues, Mickey Green and Paul Hickson, here today. This paper is about the financial governance around the gravity scheme, and it is part of a long journey with the council and the civil service and, of course, Agritas. And this has gone through audit and will go through to full council in due course. But I will leave it to my colleagues to talk about it in detail. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Green.
Thank you, Chair. Probably best to pass straight to Mr. Hickson to take you through the recommendations.
Okay, straight over to you, Paul. Paul.
Thank you very much. Just to say a little bit about the context of the report. This is the next stage of decision making we're bringing through on the journey which Councillor Wyke has referred to with the gravity site and the Agritas investment. Just mark up that the report that you see will be going to the executive next week, and there's also a kind of dotted line link to the item later on your agenda today about the Treasury Management Plan. So just making those kind of links for you. Just a little bit about the kind of recent progress and developments relevant to the report. So since we last came to the committee in late February, early March time, and the executive decision-making round in March, considerable work and steady and good progress. So with government, we've been working on the extension of the enterprise zone and the upfront grant from government, which makes the enterprise zone financing mechanism work, which you'll recall, I'm sure, from the previous report. We've been working, all that is agreed in principle. We've been working through the conditions attached to that award, and I'm pleased to say that we were kind of in a place of consensus around those, and we are due to be receiving a kind of in principle offer letter from government during this week. So we kind of Thursday's the target date for that to come across to us. We've also been working well and progressively with Agritas, the key investor, regarding the locality investment plan, which kind of is the framework for the direction of those resources. So we'll come on to the detail of that in a moment. Alongside those two areas which are most relevant to the report, continuing work on the planning side. So the next month we'll see compliance applications relating to the local development order coming through, and also on the governance side. So there was a short report to the executive last month formalising the terms of reference for the Gravity Executive Subcommittee, and we are also well advanced in designing the consultative fora, so the particularly the community forum. We have a kind of a detailed proposal for that. We very much want that to be jointly owned by Agritas and This is Gravity, the residual site owners. We'd like it to be one mechanism building on the kind of engagement work that they've done to date. So we're just discussing the detail of that with those two bodies. Just turning to the recommendations in the report and putting a bit of background detail behind them. There are 4 recommendations in the report. The first, as Councillor Wyke alluded to, refers to the financial governance arrangements to implement the enterprise zone financing mechanism. So that is covered in detail in paragraph 7.3 in the report, and just gives a breakdown of how we will govern the key aspects of that. So firstly, the decisions to borrow to resource the enterprise zone financing mechanism will fall to the executive director for resources. And then in terms of implementation, both in terms of funding allocation and, really importantly, the funding agreements that set conditions and expectations of outputs and outcomes against those investments will follow, I think, our normal financial governance. So decisions exceeding 5 million will be made through the executive subcommittee, and decisions up to that point will sit with the delegations to the executive director for climate and place. The next recommendation deals with the priorities in the locality investment plan, and I'll just deal very briefly with those. They are outlined in detail. The whole investment plan is an appendix to your report, and in the body of the main report at paragraph 16.6, you'll see the kind of the priorities highlighted for you. But just to summarise those very briefly, there are 5 priority areas which we've kind of reached agreement with Agritas about. So the first is around strategic site access and movement, so potentially the perimeter road on site, active travel connecting the site being key examples of the use of that resource. Second priority area is around the initial energy connections to the site, specifically enabling connectivity for Agritas prior to national grid connectivity, but also providing for the remainder of the site for the longer term as well. Really importantly, in terms of Somerset benefit, the next priority area is around workforce development. That spans quite an array of kind of important business. Firstly, the creation of this kind of infrastructure for skills. So linked to our experience of Hinckley, we know there will be dedicated facilities needed for the development of competencies and skills. So capital infrastructure investment, but also around courses and curriculum development and delivery as well. So to make sure that the workforce of the future is nurtured with the Agritas opportunity in mind. And then the fourth area covers additional on-site matters, so potentially water supply, infrastructure, or two-site matters as well: water supply, infrastructure, landscaping, groundworks. So that kind of category of spend. And then the final area, bearing in mind that this is like any other major development, one that sits in the community that it's based at. So as a major infrastructure development, contributions to local infrastructure priorities, so particularly the Dunball roundabout and also the Bridgewater tidal barrier. And then the final 2 recommendations in the report, the first kind of commends the aspects of the Treasury management strategy covered in your separate report in terms of the Gravity project, and the final recommendation covers the delegation to the 151 officer stroke executive director for resources to determine the kind of timing, quantum and profile of borrowing once we get into the kind of implementation stage. So those are the 4 areas covered by the report. I hope that's helpful in just setting the background to where we are and the detail in what's being recommended to the executive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could I start with just an overall question, which is obviously the work that the council has done is to make sure that the government in effect are covering the cost of the borrowing that we need to take out. Is that affected at all by the fact that we're now in a general election and there may be a different government at the end of that?
happy to give that first answer. Mickey might have his thoughts as well. So it's obviously a question in all of our minds, and that's part of the reason why we're working to a very precise timetable to get the in-principle funding offer letter out this week. So that date I mentioned is on the back of conversations on Friday about that. We always knew that will be followed up by a detailed, full and final letter. That will necessarily follow the general election. I think as with anything else, we know this is a massively important project for not just our area and our region, but the country as a whole. So we would hope this will be treated as business as usual in that sense.
Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
I've not got much to add to that, other than there has been a ministerially chaired task force, which we've been members along with Agritas and different government departments. So I would expect that would continue under any new government, and that will, help ensure. I mean, its purpose is to ensure to address any issues to getting this in place at pace. So. Yeah, there are risks clearly, but I think this is a massive long-term project. So I think there always would have been this impact at some point through the process. It's probably slightly earlier than we had envisaged.
Thank you. Councillor Hophouse.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm sad to see that we haven't talked anywhere in this paper about solar panels on the roof or the alignment of the factories. Can we please make sure that's added at some stage before it goes to the executive?
Paul, do you want to pick that up? Because I guess that comes into kind of quite a complex area around subsidy control and what we can, and we are not funding everything through this investment plan. So my understanding is that it is Agritas's intention to have solar panels on the roof of their facility. But based on our legal advice, we don't think that is something that is viable for us to support through this investment plan.
I've just come in there to kind of cover the detail. So during our discussions about the investment plan priorities, two relevant aspects here. Firstly, we knew that given the very large footprint of the three buildings that Agritas are envisaging, the solar panel infrastructure they're planning had a very large cost to it. So that would have been out of proportion with the investment plan resources that we had. So practically wise, we weren't going to be making a difference or adding value by a portion of this investment plan contributing to parts of those costs. But Mickey alludes to a kind of more important principle that all the investment plan investment has to be delivered compliant to the subsidy control regime, and where that is providing a direct subsidy to a business, that has to be very clear that it's about abnormal, supernormal costs rather than the normal cost of construction of a building. And whereas some of the connections to the site and the abnormal infrastructure costs, our advisors tell us can be accommodated consistent with subsidy control, there would have been difficulties with the solar panel infrastructure point. But I think you can give confidence that will be delivered through the investors' plans anyway.
Thank you. Councillor White, you want to come in?
Thank you. Just to remind people that this is a LDO, enterprise zone, and as such, a lot of the planning has already been determined when the LDO was set up some years ago. And there are a number of environmental elements to the existing LDO, which the developer will need to adhere to. And we'll see that coming through as we get the plans. There is no 106 related to this other than what was originally agreed when the LDO was established. And therefore, it's there are significant environmental requirements as part of the LDO, but it is very different from the normal planning applications we will be seeing. And I'd just like to remind people of that.
Thank you. Any other questions from members in the room? Yes, Councillor Rodriguez.
Thank you, Chair. Just firstly, thank you to the officers for all the hard work they put into this one. Being a councillor from Bridgewater, really excited, obviously, and can't overstate that enough. Just one question I do have, really, on the report and the document that was also attached. The Dunball roundabout, I just want some reassurance, really, on that one, that it is going to be done within the time frame that is within the report, because we know that that's a problem area for people that live in Bridgewater and surrounding areas, and a lot of people really sick to their back teeth with traffic at peak times. And we also know that that particular project originally was meant to have been completed back in February of this year. That's what we were told last year, and that was delayed. So I just want some reassurance that the timeline that you've set out in the report is going to be the timeline, and it won't be delayed any further, because obviously all that traffic coming in, construction traffic, will add huge pressures onto the existing road infrastructure and residents using that particular road.
Again, Paul might want to add in some detail, but yeah, there's nothing at the moment to indicate that we're not on the trajectory we want to be on. I guess I'd describe this piece of funding as the final piece in that jigsaw, which is why it's so important. And if you like, the buckets of funding, that's the reason why we separated that one out from the larger kind of strategic site access, to recognise its importance and make sure it was highlighted that whilst discussions about strategic infrastructure and connectivity might take longer, actually that one is particularly critical for us, as is the Bridgewater tidal barrier. So that's why you see it as a separate bucket in the investment plan. Paul, do you want to add anything on timetable?
I don't think that there is anything to add, really. It's a necessary enabler of the development to happen, isn't it? And we'll kind of manage it in that way.
Thank you very much. If I could ask a quick query in relation to the report itself. On page 36, it's 1614. There's been the response to the feedback that you had in terms of engaging with locals and members. Just wanted some clarity. It says that the All Forum will have regular information. Just wanted to get some idea as to what you mean by regular. And also, how does that forum, local community forum, how do they both feed into the decision-making process rather than them just being just an advisory, keeping everyone up to date with what's happening? Is there any way that they actually feed into what's happening?
If I just come in there, I think we're envisaging that the members forum would meet on a bi-monthly cycle, and the community forum would be at least a quarterly event. In the terms of reference of the executive committee, it is made clear that both of those bodies, the kind of the agendas and feedback from them will be taken to the exec committee. So we're kind of wanting to embed that principle of a link between those consultative and advisory bodies and the executive role of the subcommittee. I think there's positive learning from the Hinkley Point C experience there, so that we make sure that we've got, in governance terms, a channel through which topics, issues, concerns, good ideas are fed through to the kind of the council's executive decision-making processes, and frankly, its overview of the project as well. So those are, it's helpful and good that you've raised it. Those are kind of important principles that we want to embed in delivery here.
Thank you very much. Councillor Seep.
Thank you. Just picking up on Councillor Rodriguez's points, if we have major external projects which are key dependencies for this one, surely they should be tracked individually within the risk matrix, page 27 et al.
If I take that one, yeah, I think once we get in, once we get past this phase, I think that's an entirely appropriate comment, because each one of the elements of this is a significant program in its own right. Often we won't be the body delivering different elements of it. We will just be providing an element of funding towards something. So you're right that at that stage, the way we manage risks will have to become much more tailored to the individual elements, and things like Dunball would naturally fall within kind of our program of works and the way we manage risks individually there.
If I could just come back, I think there's a general point there that really a risk matrix in this context with such a large interlinked program of various projects, I would expect the risk at the top level risk matrix to be principally the external uncontrolled risks upon which there is a dependency. At the moment, what we have is a risk matrix which is really centered around outcomes rather than the risk of things happening late that we're dependent upon. I think the dependencies is absolutely key on this one, particularly given the impacts on the wider area around Bridgewater. So I'd encourage you to have a good look at the risk matrix in the next phase.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions within the? Yes, Councillor Lakeshall.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make a couple of points about risk and how risk is shown in committee papers. So we'll be hearing more about it at the Audit Committee tomorrow, and the move to a piece of software now called IdeaGen, which will do both risk and performance for the council in due course. And then we will be drawing from one piece of software rather than risk being identified differently in each committee paper, and that work will be overseen by the Risk Performance and Budget Monitoring Board, which I chair now. That's not a public meeting, but there is a huge amount of work going on, because one of the things that does concern me is every time I look at different committee papers, they're pulling risks, strategic risks and specific risks from different places, and they are demonstrated differently. So the work that we'll be going through audit tomorrow will start that journey of us getting to a much more consistent place. And then a selection of risk can then be pulled out and put into a report on the date that it's extracted from what is in effect a database of risks. And this is all work in progress. So if you think she doesn't know what she's talking about yet, you're not far away. But I do really, really need to see papers where demonstration of risk is consistent and that they are not drawn up by different officers for different committee papers. So work in progress, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, and we won't get Jamie to minute that last bit either. So. Okay, I'm not. Yes, I am. Councillor Osborne.
I'm not hearing anything, Chair.
She hasn't said anything yet, so we're just working, getting the microphone going. It is on. Go for
Sorry.
it. Hickson, do you want to take that, or is that Mr. Green?
Afraid we
Sorry,
didn't hear
online, we
anything
didn't hear
online.
anything. We assumed you were still fixing the microphone. Apologies. If somebody could summarise or the question.
Yes, so Councillor Osborne was asking if when you look at the layout on page, I think it was 63, whether there was a way of making it simpler in terms of the interreaction between the different groups that are monitoring and looking at what is happening on this site, and whether there could be almost like the description was whether there could be a family tree of sort of how the various groups interact with each other and feed into the process.
That's certainly something we can take, and when we have tried, it is complex, if I'm honest. Part of that comes from the long legacy of this, so there are things enshrined in the LDO, as you heard from Paul earlier, where we have things enshrined in the LDO that look at community. Actually, we wanted to make sure we didn't create two groups that look, had a different timescale or focus, and therefore we have tried to bring that together. We will absolutely take that away and try and represent it, but it will have quite a lot of arrows on it because by nature everything is interconnected here. But yeah, absolutely happy to try and work on that.
Work? Yes, it has. Hallelujah. Just one final point.
Before you carry on, Councillor Osborne, can you hear online now, Councillor Osborne?
Yes.
You can.
You
Excellent.
can hear
Thank
me
you.
online. That's great. Just a final point. How are the local division members going to be kept in the loop and involved, because they are the people that are on the front line, and they are the people that the local res community is probably going to turn to first when they have queries and inquiries. For example, there's a current news story running about what is likely to be stored on the site, and it doesn't again make it explicitly clear whether or not local members are going to have an enhanced role to play. I don't mean local, I mean the divisional members for the division that this site sits in. They probably need to perhaps have additional briefings. They maybe need to be involved a little more closely than perhaps the rest of us are. And I'm not sure how that's going to happen.
If I could answer that one, and I understand the sentiment absolutely there. I think in kind of structural terms, obviously the local members, the two divisional members concerned, and maybe beyond, are fundamental to the members forum. The Gravity Executive Committee is open to all members to attend. It's a public meeting and provides a conduit as well. But over and above that, I think your point around ensuring that they are proactively briefed, and there's a dialogue with them as the project, through its various stages, kind of moves forward. It's a very valid one, and something we should make sure that, without adding another few arrows to Mickey's governance diagram, just mentioned that we're doing absolutely the right things there. So thank you for the prompt, and we'll make sure we don't lose sight of that.
Yeah,
absolutely. But just to add to that,
can we have it explicitly written in?
Mr. Green.
I believe the place that would be written in is in the terms of reference for the subcommittee, which previously went through exec. I would need to jump back to that paper to look at exactly how we described it. I would point out, because everything you've asked is valid, everything Paul has said is valid, but the nature of this project does mean that it has impacts more widely. So, for example, if you're looking at strategic connectivity, the local members that would have a valid interest in this, or a particular interest, I should say, would spread differently as they would over skills or any of the other areas we look at. So, I think it's hard for us to write for every eventuality. Hopefully, Paul's clarified in the previous paper, which I'm sure we can provide a link to if it's not linked in the background papers, around the terms of reference for the governance, make it explicit how we're going to approach this.
Thank you. In the room, I've got two more councillors who've indicated, Councillor Seeb and Councillor Johnson, and then Councillor Chilcott online. So, Councillor Seeb.
Thank you. Sorry to keep punching the bruise, so to speak, but if the governance is too difficult for you to explain or put in a diagram, that probably ought to be fairly near the top of your risk matrix, because you need to actually simplify it down to the point where it works. You need to work out where the essential governance is that actually affects the outcomes of the programme, and where the communication is the prime aim of the governance. It's making sure that there's buy-in, shall we say, because quite clearly I haven't heard anything today that makes me comfortable with your governance statement. You've got a very long paper on governance. You've got no diagram, and you've just dodged a question on having an organogram. And actually, you need to have quick and clean decision making with clear accountability, which this isn't, which means that there will be delay in the programme while it goes round through 14 different handshakes. There should just be a few handshakes. Sorry, rant over.
Yeah, with respect, that was the subject of the paper that went through exec, and hence the learning from the EDF project and the establishment of that executive subcommittee to make sure there was transparency, to make sure that was balanced with the need for pace on a project like this, to reflect all of that learning from Hinckley, to make explicit how the community forum would link into that body. So that was the subject of a separate paper. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lashon in the committee, we want to comment on that.
Thank you, Chair. On the terms of reference for the Gravity Executive Subcommittee, item 10 under functions is to oversee and act on feedback and issues raised by members, stakeholders and local communities through engagement and consultation with the relevant groups and fora. So somebody did their Latin classes, but there are a number of functions in there. That is one of them. But I would say that this is a new subcommittee. I think it's the right thing to do to have a subcommittee, but it's in its infancy and the project is huge and developing. And I'm sure that that is the place for Scrutiny to feed back if Scrutiny feels that those terms of reference are not all encompassing. I'm sure that we can, at Executive, make changes to that subcommittee. Of course we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Many thanks for the presentation. I was concerned when I heard you say that the community forums would be on a quarterly basis. I've had a development in my area I represent, and it's been very helpful to have monthly meetings with the planning officer, which were attended by local county councillors and local parish councillors, because with developments like this, and this is much larger scale than the development I've had in my patch, a lot of the things that come up are very immediate, and it can be ensuring that a KEMP is being followed up. And, you know, a quarterly meeting would really not help if residents had immediate concerns. So my suggestion would be that you maybe have a rethink about a quarterly meeting for your community forums, because I don't think it's immediate enough for things that come up in the community with developments like this.
Just to come in on that particular point, I think that is the kind of formal and official timetable that we would use, but we would absolutely supplement that, particularly in the link to the local development order and the stages of the planning process. I think the next couple of years are going to see, you know, a lot of a kind of intensity to the scheme as you've rightly raised, and we'll kind of need to ensure that as well as that kind of calendar-based approach, that key stages are kind of met with community engagement. I think worthwhile also saying that we're talking a little bit here about structures, important to also reflect on resources. So in terms of both Agritas and the council both recognise the importance of dedicating resource to kind of community engagement. As part of our kind of core project team, we will be making sure there's dedicated engagement resource to work with you know, all local stakeholders and make sure that there's communications flow throughout the project. And I'm thinking they're not you know, of a broad span, so the business community as well as local communities themselves. So you know, I think it's a helpful steer that we need to be very kind of focused on making sure that engagement is tuned up for the project, but hope that gives a flavour too.
Thank you. Councillor Locke.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I may have missed it, but when Liz spoke about the risk and everything, and she said about it all being the different strains, the different groups being brought together, so they're all working, I'll say, from the same method or the same matrix. When is that? Did she? Could you confirm then when that's going to be in place? Because it's important that they're all working from the same system as soon as possible, so that we, when we're scrutinising anything, can evaluate the risk and whether the everything is being met of what the risks are allocated against and everything.
Thank you, Councillor.
If you see where I
understood.
Otherwise, it can be just left open-ended. So when is it going to be up and running and collated? If you see what I mean.
Councillor Aisham.
Thank you, Chair. I would say it will be, of course, a very large piece of work. Sean Kenny has already started work on it. The first paper generated from that software is an audit tomorrow, which is a progress report on the external auditor's findings for this council. And I'll have to come back to you when I know more about what will be ready when. Audit has the responsibility of looking at risk, so I'm sure we'll hear more at audit tomorrow.
Thank you. Councillor Chilcott.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, committee. I have a few questions. I don't know whether you want me to troll them all out. They are on different topics, or whether you want them one at a time, Chair.
Let's try them one at a time. Start with Mandy.
Bab. Firstly, just a comment really. Obviously, having been a West Somerset councillor, there are a lot of similarities in some ways and not in others with the Hinckley project. So just for me, firstly, there were a few learns from Hinckley for me. One of them was around the mapping of accommodation. There was a huge amount, even before anybody set foot on site, around that and where they thought people were going to live and where some would travel from. I have to say, as time went on, it wasn't very accurate, even though there'd been a huge amount of work put into it. So I'd be really interested to know whether you have looked at that work from start to finish, just to have some learns from it. And this is just commentary. I'm not expecting a response. And also, we've heard a lot about risk. I know Councillor Lation's doing an awful lot on risk, but I think the thing we are missing probably with this project in particular is that interdependency of risk, in that one risk links to another. And I'm not sure quite how you capture that. And I have to say, risk register wise, councillors in previous authorities, Somerset West and Taunton, councillors were involved in those risks and what they felt the risk should be, and there were open conversations about them, and that might be helpful moving forward. So to move on quickly to my questions, my first one is on page 53 of the papers, and it says the enterprise zone designation for the gravity site for the additional 10 years. This extension is yet to be formally confirmed and will be subject to a secondary legislation. So my first question is that secondary legislation? Obviously there will be a delay on that. Will that impact, and in making recommendations, whether it's through the executive or full council, will any of them include a subject to agreement? I'm just concerned there's a lot of decisions being made at the moment, but quite a few of them are subject to other things being in place. And I just want to ensure in agreeing recommendations, the executive and full council understand there might be other things that need to be in place when making those decisions. So that's first question. Sorry for rather long-winded.
Thank you, Mr. Green.
Shall I just jump in on the kind of
Please do.
Some of the aspects there? So firstly, Councillor Chilcott's points about both the generality of learning from the Hinkley Point C project and the specifics around accommodation, I think are very well well made. We talked a little bit around deploying some of the learning in terms of our governance structures for the project. For example, I think the point also about the reality not looking quite like what it would look like at the kind of early proposal stage is inevitable, isn't it, with large and complex projects. So we need to be nimble and tracking of how the project rolls out as well. So accept that point. I think just to make the very obvious point that we're talking about Hinckley almost as a historic project, when of course it's very much a live, ongoing one. So Councillor Chilcott used the word interdependency. Actually, there are going to be ongoing interdependencies between the Hinckley Point C project and the Agritas investment, both, particularly in terms, I suppose, with their construction workforces as well. So we are alert to that complexity. So it's very, very, very right to raise that. In terms of the enterprise zone, I just touch on that briefly. Obviously, you are right that is the state of play. The in principle letter will give us comfort around the principles of the 10-year extension, but that secondary legislation will be needed. I mean, that is the reading out of orders in Parliament, so it isn't going to necessitate a large amount of parliamentary time, but nevertheless, clearly that there is a delay there. Yes, I think we need to make sure that in terms of how we kind of narrate the next stages with the project and the steps that we take, that we are, we're not jumping ahead in that respect. I think the decisions that are proposed to be delegated to the 151 officer also give them the authority to do so, but also to manage the timing and implementation of borrowing. So that will be consistent with making sure that all the the formalities are in place rather than pre-committing the council in any way.
Just to add 2 points to that, if I may, Chair, we have, and through this process, we have met with the joint DLUC HMT team who actually lay those statutory instruments to kind of talk through those practicalities, and just reflecting on lots of the conversation about risk, what I would call programme risk. We will take that away in terms of how we make sure we report back and involve members through those regular fora to get the Latin right, to kind of ensure there's transparency and involvement of members in there.
Thank you, Chair. Moving on, my next question is on page 56, which is the investment plan summary. I just want to make sure my reading of it's right. So the paper, the first item there talks about the 74 million for a second road connection from junction 22A, funded by the Department for Transport. And then you've got a total there of 150 million. Now, I've heard 150 million talked about as a figure that we might need to borrow, but I wasn't quite sure how you get to the 150 million, because if the first 74 million is coming via Department of Transport, it wouldn't be anywhere near the 150, or is it that they are paying for the junction 22A and the other parts of it come to 74 million? I wasn't quite sure from that table.
Yeah, there's a longer table which is probably clear in terms of how it adds up to the 150 million in the appended investment plan, but effectively it's your later point is the right one. A motorway junction is the province of national government and national highways, if you like. Our contribution to roads would be about the link road and a perimeter road around the site. It wouldn't be taking on the whole of those costs. It wouldn't be taking on any of those delivery risks. And also the bucket, if you like, is larger than just that. So it does provide that kind of room for that funding to be used in multiple ways. So we don't want to jump ahead, if you like. We haven't had that business case submission, if you like, from Agritas for the funding, but hopefully that answers.
Thank you. It wasn't clear, so I think if you're writing something similar again, just separating out the two to make sure there's different elements of it. Because again, we will be dependent on some of the work for other funding streams. Thank you. Next question is around page 58, which is the work with the national grid to have the connection there, which we understand will be needed. I'm just checking that this is actually programmed in, which is probably obvious, but I know that National Grid have had a lot of challenges in the southwest with anything that's sort of high power. Just some reassurance really that that's in place and should go through in a timely manner.
Yeah, but again, if I just start, so relevant ministers also attend that ministerial task force. Like everything with this, it's complicated. There's an initial energy connection, which is then used for a couple of years, and then there's a high-powered energy connection. The initial energy connection, I believe, the kind of orders are placed, or is in the program, and the longer-term kind of high-power connection has been the subject of a lot of work to make sure that the kind of that it does deliver to the time scale that this project needs. And to add to that, I think actually there's then some learning from how they've worked through this project to how that can be applied to other projects nationally. I don't know, Paul, if you want to add anything to that.
Thanks, Mickey. I would just add briefly that it feels to me that government has involved officials from the energy wing of government very early in the kind of the project. So it feels they are closely embedded in the kind of preparatory work on the infrastructure side. I suppose that talks a little bit to government seeing it as a potentially risky area and being cautious, but also it demonstrates that they're kind of managing that delivery.
Thank you. I know it's been challenging for quite a lot of sites, so I hope that runs smoothly. My next question is around retained business rates, which again is key in terms of finance moving forwards. It talks about other occupiers of the site. Now, I'm just wondering in our modelling whether everything still stacks up if no other occupiers come forward. So I'm trying to get a gauge of, you know, how much dependency, how much in the business case is needed. And in the event that nobody comes forward, will it still be viable and sustainable for Somerset Council?
That's probably just a simple yes to confirm in terms of the modelling has been very prudent, and therefore it hasn't assumed any other occupiers come on board. Obviously, we're working hard with This Is Gravity that isn't the case, but it doesn't assume any other occupiers on the portion of the site not owned by Agritas, or indeed that Agritas occupy the full element of their site. We're only focused on what we can be confident in now, because I think with these numbers it would be imprudent to do anything else.
Thank you. It'd be nice to have sort of an in-depth look at the numbers at some point, because we've just got sort of very touching the surface with these. And I hope as we move forwards, we can have a bit more numbers behind what's going on as the picture becomes clearer. Thank you, Chair. Thanks for your forbearance.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take one more member's comment and then we're going to wind this one up. So, Councillor Johnson.
I may have missed it, but I'm just curious, is there no phosphate offset required for this project? Is it because it's an LGO, it sits outside the phosphate situation?
If I could just come in there, firstly, in terms of the geography, so the area north area is less affected by the phosphates issue than many other parts of Somerset. I think more fundamentally, there is no accommodation involved on site, so the planning uses don't require that phosphate mitigation that accommodation related uses would.
Yeah, certainly I know that when there was the 4 districts, Sedgemoor, because of the way the water flows not towards the levels, it was not such an encumbrance as it has been for the other 3 districts. So we were the right side of the water flow. Okay. I've not seen any other comments from members, so thank you very much for the presentation. I think it has been useful, and obviously you've heard the comments that have been raised by members. I think there's a number of issues I think exec will obviously look at when they're taking this forward, relating to things along the lines of security of funding, the planning gain that is coming from this and how that is widely spread. feedback and the member involvement has obviously been raised as an issue that needs to be closely followed, particularly the tracking of risks and identifying those as cumulative risks as well as individual ones. The integration of groups into how they work together, the simplifying of the governance structure so that members and those outside the council can understand the processes that we will be following and those of us who are engaged in it, and also the community engagement, as was raised by members, that they're kept very much part of the process on a regular basis as this is moving forward, because it's so much easier to engage early than it is to try and deal with issues that come up late in the process. So it's been useful again to have councillors Wyke and councillor Leish on here, because you'll be at the executive when this is being discussed and taken forward. So hopefully those issues can be built into the process. But thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you to your team that's doing the work on this. It's a really exciting project for the whole of Somerset. So hopefully nothing will knock us off course. But thank you. Right, members, moving on to our next item, which is improvement and transformation. I think I'm being told it's Louise Ratley and Dawn Bettridge are presenting. So if you'd like to introduce this paper, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I was just going to check whether we've got Councillor Phillips online or whether is he? That's okay. I was just conscious that he might have wanted to open it, but in his absence, I'll just do some quick introductions. For those of you that haven't met me before, hopefully I've met all of you by now, but my name's Dawn Bettridge. I'm the Interim Service Director for Workforce. I'm covering today for Alan Jones, who's on leave, and I'm accompanied by Louise Routley to my left. Louise is the report author for this item, which is to provide you with an update on the improvement and transformation programme. And I'm also joined online by Sarah Skirton, who's the Service Director for Partnerships and Localities. So we are hoping between the three of us we can field your questions today sufficiently, but clearly if there is anything that we're unable to deal with, we will come back to you at the earliest opportunity. So just to introduce the paper itself, which I believe is on page 76 if you're on ModGov, or page 2 if you're just looking at the report as a standalone. This is a copy of the paper that is due to go to the executive in June. So it gives you an opportunity to obviously scrutinise and discuss with us any concerns or issues you have regarding the progress that we've made to date. If I can just refer to the recommendations on the second page of the report, which is on page 76, we're asking Corporate Resources and Scrutiny to consider the latest progress prior to this report being discussed at Executive on the 6th of June, with a particular focus on the following: the scope and organisation of the programme, which you'll see within the report has been developed into 5 work streams or 5 programmes in itself. Progress that has been made since the last updates to scrutiny on the 7th of March and the briefing of the 2nd of April, including the timelines and milestones. And we've also added in the current risk assessment, covering strategic risks that may arise during the transformation progress. I just wanted to mention as well, due to previous comments about risk and the lack of consistency in the report, when this report was submitted to you, it was still draft, obviously, because we're still working on it for executive. There is a change to one of the risks within there to make sure it's totally aligned with the programme register, risk register, and the strategic risk register. So we're working on this consistency. What we've actually done is put some additional mitigations in place, which has dropped a red risk. But I'll let Louise just outline the changes in this report, which I'm sure you would have had a question on, which might head that one off at the pass. So Louise, over to you.
Hi everybody. Yeah, the key risk change is within risk 3 on the report, which is insufficient budget to fund redundancies. That was initially RAG rated to 20 and mitigation was 20. Following discussions with section 151, and it was agreed that score should be reduced to 12. Initially the score the mitigation should be reduced to 12. Initially, the score of 20 was inputted as it was felt the risk couldn't be mitigated until the council received the capitalisation directive and the forecast for capital receipts. So subsequently, following discussions with section 151 and him reviewing that risk, that they finance own that risk, excuse me, it was agreed that and advised by section 151 that every council that is requested exceptional financial support from DLUC in the form of a capitalisation directive is being supported. That we have a forecast of capital receipts from the disposable assets, including commercial properties that are actively managed through the Property Investment Executive Subcommittee and Asset Management Group, and also that we have £40 million in the bank of capital receipts at present to cover the first batch of voluntary redundancy costs. And we are anticipating over 25 million of capital receipts from disposals that are close to being finalised. What I've just read there is has been updated in the mitigating update within the executive report. So even though it's risk 3 doesn't have that information within the scrutiny report, it has been updated in the executive report. I think Dawn has just touched on around the programme risk and aligning that to the corporate approach, and we will be one of the first tranche of programmes and projects to be aligning to the new corporate approach as of next week. So all our risks will be added onto InfoGen, I call it Pentana, but it's the same system. So our risk matrix will then align to the organisation. So future risks associated with the programme will be aligned to the corporate approach. And just in terms of the feedback that we'd like from scrutiny is as per the recommendations, but is a feedback on the risks. Is there anything else that you think should be considered? So this is being developed within with officers, but we're bringing it to scrutiny in order to get your feedback in terms of if there's anything that you think we should be included on the risk register and consider. And also we'd like when we came in March is to understand if there's any topics or particular programme risks that scrutiny would want us to bring back for you to consider in more detail. I think that from me.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Any questions from members? If I can start actually on the one that you raised, the risk 3, it states within there that this was written with the report as of the 1st of May. We hadn't heard from government. We're now a month further on. We still haven't heard. When do we expect that we will hear? And Councillor Layshaw.
Thank you, Chair. I can give you a bit of an update on all of this, and I think it's really important to understand the difference between the capitalisation direction and flexible use of capital receipts, because we've got both opportunities. So to hear from government on the capitalisation direction, we first of all need our outturn for 23-24. So that may be a bit later than we'd originally expected. That could be conceived as a really high risk, but the 151 officer, Jason Vaughan, made sure in our budget setting in February that we had a revised policy for flexible use of capital receipts. And the difference is, if you want to borrow for capitalisation direction to spend capital monies on revenue, then you need the capitalisation direction. If you're selling assets, you can use that money either way, through the capitalisation direction or through flexible use of capital receipts. So when we were budget setting in February, we did our very best to ensure that we had the belt and the braces. It's much more usual to use flexible use of capital receipts for something like 2, 3, 4 million. This would be on a different scale completely, of course, but I think it is really important to understand that. And then if I may just take a couple more minutes to explain where disposal of assets sits within the asset management group, that is council's own assets, so land and property, and also the devolution to parish, town and city councils. And then in the executive subcommittee, that is where disposal of commercial investments are considered. So that it took me a while to work out exactly what we were doing in each committee, and there are huge numbers of committees and subcommittees and boards and groups at the moment, and I'm not quite sure how often I put my hand up, but I seem to be on most of them at the moment. And for me, this tying together of management of risk and performance and budget monitoring is absolutely top of my list of what I want to see done properly this current financial year. And if we can get that right, that will mean then that this scrutiny will have quarterly reporting that pulls together performance, risk and budget monitoring. And I hear from Jason Vaughan as well, we're looking at the possibility of changing the software that works for Microsoft Dynamics that does the monthly budget monitoring as well, so that we pull them all together. And I'm sorry, I can't tell you exactly when you'll see each report, but I can assure you that I won't let up on this. It is incredibly important for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks for that briefing, Liz. You made reference that there's an awful lot of boards and committees, subgroups, etc. Isn't that not a risk in itself, that if they're all interdependent, we have a similar situation as with our previous agenda item, that there are so many interdependencies, and if one happens to falter, it impacts the rest. So that in itself is a risk. And also as well, there's an enormous number of risks on this risk register. It's a very large one, and a lot of them are also red. So what is the overall risk of this particular workstream programme? Because in itself, it seems to be a very high risk project in its own right. But I don't see it sort of reflected anywhere except through the individual components on the risk register, a significant number of which are red.
So shall I come back, Chair? For me, it all sits under the one big risk, which is how we get to set a budget next February. So that is a strategic risk. It is an obvious risk. And these risks that you're looking at here, non-delivery of MTFP savings, improvement and transformation plan, they all lead to that point next February when we either can or cannot set Councillor Chilcott terms it correctly, a properly balanced budget. So there is a legal budget. We have a legal budget this year, but we're using one-off resources in order to do that, both capitalisation direction and use of reserves. What we need to get to by next February is something that is much, much closer to a properly balanced budget, because neither Somerset Council nor any other council that has been in the position of using reserves over the last few years, particularly since inflation became such an issue, none of us can continue that way. So where the work that Louise and Dawn are reporting on now is absolutely critical part of that move towards next February. So on my wall at home and above my desk, I've got all of my milestones, and they all lead to next February. And next February, well, it'll be before February, of course. We'll know by, I'd say, Christmas. I think the milestones leading to that are the Q1 reports. So you'll see month 2, but really when we get to Q1 and we start looking at performance and risk and budget monitoring together. I'm not sure how they'll work together at that point. It might be a bit early in the year for me to expect too much, but then that will lead us through the summer and get us to a position where we started to understand our picture last August. We need to be in a much better place this coming August and September. And you'll know, of course, from full council, the redundancies, the voluntary redundancies that we have. So we have other risks in there as well about loss of key people. And I completely take on board your point about all of those boards and subcommittees and committees working together with executive and full council. I'd say that risk was always in the move to one council, because you are taking 5 teams of people and making them one team of people. And if it seems like really hard work at the moment, it is, and it probably always was going to be that. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Seeb and then Councillor Rodriguez.
Thank you. I can understand why the impression is that there's a lot of red here in this risk table. I mean, as I'm sure the officers would want to point out, it's the mitigated risk on the right-hand side that you need to be looking at. But I also think that the table itself could probably do with a refresh and a rewrite without necessarily changing the content. There are several driving factors which are common to multiple risks in here, such as, for example, if you take risk 4, attrition of staff in this environment overlaps with the motivation, overlaps and has the same effect in many areas. I'm not sure it's reasonable to suggest that the VR scheme should be a driver of lack of resources, because actually the mitigation is we won't VR the people we need, which is just day-to-day management, not a risk. But if you have a look further down, you'll see that there's the unmotivated workforce feed in. There are outcomes which are driven by the insufficient resource to deliver business as usual, etc. These are all very closely related, and I think it probably makes more sense to be looking at the drivers in terms of what's the thing that's happening to you that you are less able to control, and then what are the many outcomes? Because I think what we've done is we've sort of looked at the many outcomes, and they've all got the same controlling factor, which makes it a very long table of what appears to be a lot of red with a lot of similar mitigations. Yeah, and I think if you get that the right way around, life becomes simpler. But actually, I'm less worried than most about this. I can see all the right things happening in that second from right column, and I think the overall, given what we're doing, the overall score I sort of buy in and can relate to.
Would you like to comment on the review of risks?
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you for just pointing out. I think what we've tried to do in this is just be as transparent as possible as a programme team on the vast array of risks that go across probably the most enormous improvement and transformation plan that probably this authority will ever consider for many years to come. It is huge. So we wanted to try and be as transparent as possible, but we'd definitely take away that feedback and look at how we can theme and bring it together so it's more concise, but without losing, the depth of the analysis that we've put in here. In terms of, so I think that was really all I needed to say on that one, to be honest. So we'll take that away and we'll sort of have a look at how we present it going forward. But again, it was just to reassure you that risk 3 that was still showing us, I think it's 20 after mitigation, has now been reprofiled to 12. So there are no red risks if we take all this mitigation action and we take it successfully, but it was highlighting the level and the volume of the serious risks that we have if we don't put those mitigations in place and monitoring them really closely as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rodriguez.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of things just to help me understand the information I've got in front of me. The high-level timeline for the programme, you mentioned about it being refreshed. I'm just trying to understand, having not been at the last scrutiny meeting, what has been refreshed on there? 'Cause perhaps you've indicated it, but I can't. It's not very clear to me. So if you could just let me know about that one, and also looking at the high-level activity timeline, which is a document we were sent via email, and as a supplement to item 7, some of that on there, I've tried to zoom in as much as I can to read what's written on it, but I mean capable of reading it because the writing is probably a 0.1 font, I'm not quite sure. So again, it's just making that clear for us to understand, because I can't read that, and who knows, I may have a question or two on it, but I don't know unless I can read it.
So the timeline in the scrutiny paper and it's slightly different to that in the executive paper, because we're still working on the key products, and the workforce work stream, which is at the top of the timeline. There's just some additional, there's additions in the executive report around the future layers 4 to 6 restructure that will be taking place, which we've added in. So there's additional key milestones that have been identified in the executive report. It's only nominal changes that have taken place between scrutiny and the executive report. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that does, thank you. But it's just perhaps at future reports it'd be better just to make clear what the changes are so we can actually track it then, otherwise I just don't know.
Yeah, and it's also we have got a detailed Gantt chart that sits behind the timelines and the various product timelines as well, and this is just picking out the key milestones, so that otherwise it'd be a holy mess what we'd have to present to you.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions within the room? Could I ask two very general questions in some respects in terms of risk? In terms of the speed of delivery of this programme, where does the risk fit in terms of, in effect, events overtaking us in terms of what else financially may well be hitting us, and where's that reflected and how do we deal with it? And the other thing, just for members, sometimes it's easier for us to get our heads around the detail of restructures and those, whereas at the moment obviously we're not at that stage, but when do we think we're getting to the stage of knowing exactly how the restructuring happens and what the detail of that is, that members can then maybe engage more with?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, for those questions. They're tough ones to probably address directly. In terms of the financial risks within this programme, what we're actually doing is the governance that is in place just enables us to track this on a weekly basis. We have programme meetings. We also have programme steering group meetings. And anything that of concern is escalated through to the transformation board. If it's a corporate strategic risk, it's also discussed at the executive leadership team. All of this is overseen by the chief executive and Alan Jones, the senior responsible officer. So there's a very tight grip and control in monitoring where we are, where we expect to be against the programme plan, and what the implications of any slippages are. So, for example, on Monday at the Design Authority, we will be having a meeting to look at what's the impact of the general election on this programme. How does that impact on our HR and finance resources to deliver at this pace, and other key resources that need to be available? We still believe that at the moment we can remain on track, but we need to contingency plan. So my team are also looking at a plan B and maybe a plan C for how we deliver on this workforce programme to deliver the savings by the end of this financial year. So we know that we've got a target of £40 million to save to fill that workforce gap for 25-26. They've got to be realised by the end of March. In addition to that, we've got the LGR savings that we need to secure for this year and also to bring forward from next year as well. So it is a considerable picture of financial savings in the region of 49 million that we're looking at in reality between now and the end of March. So this is being very closely and tightly monitored. And if something unforeseen comes in that we are totally not in control of, then obviously we will be having those conversations regularly with the Section 151 officer to look at what's the mitigation for those risks. What's plan B, what's plan C, or is it actually going to take us off the rails? So, you know, I can't guarantee that we'll hit every single one of these milestones that we've got in this plan, but we're doing everything feasibly possible to organise all of our resources and our in-house expertise to be able to deliver this on time. But we are being very pragmatic and realistic and looking at where the leverage is, where the movement is, and how much wriggle room that we have. But we are planning this programme quite aggressively and robustly, and that will give us a little bit of wriggle room if we need it. So we are full on attacking these milestones, and where we're getting problems, the conversation is how do we overcome them? And that's what's been needed behind the scenes, is all coming together as one team across directorates, across services, to actually work together on this. So when we do hit problems, which we do hit, it's the issue is what is the issue and how do we overcome it? What are the options? If things aren't working, we stop, we change direction and take a different direction. So we're in continuous conversation as well with our trade union colleagues around the organisational design principles. So learning the lessons from the past, what do we need to do differently so we don't repeat some of the mistakes that were made in our former legacy councils, and also when we were doing LGR, where we were not delivering at a sufficient pace and size for what the council ended up requiring. So all of that is being taken into account, just to give you some reassurance of how we're working. In terms of when, I know it's not the first time I've been asked, when will you be able to see all the restructures and all of the detail? Obviously, we're consulting at the moment on layers 2 and 3, which is the consultation for our new corporate leadership team. So all of our executive directors and service directors are currently within that 45-day period of consultation until, I think it's the 26th of June, will be the end of that period. We are also working very, very hard behind the scenes to confirm the rest of the organisational structures from top to bottom of the council, which is work being led by our design authority, which is overseen by the chief executive. So we have now, and we've also engaged all of the service directors in that activity confidentially as well, where they've put forward their recommendations for what their structures could look like. And then using the organisational design principles, we're challenging those assumptions. So where we are now with the process is we are looking to validate it through HR and finance to actually do an assessment of our as-is organisational structures and the new proposed structure, and to see exactly how that affects all of our employees across the organisation, but particularly managers at level 4 and 5, and then those 2 layers down. What we're also doing is just to make sure that we can financially validate the difference between the 2 as well. So understanding if we were to implement these new structures, what will be the difference in terms of savings? Are we close enough to the savings that we're going to need? And in parallel to that, in the report, it refers to 11 key lines of inquiry. So we're tracking 10 other pay bill items that will help us to shrink that pressure and to reduce our pay bill by the end of the year. So all of that is happening in parallel. The killer date that we're working to is July for the consultation for the rest of the organisation. Now, layer 6, which is the lowest layer that we're hoping to get to, we're doing our best to try and get from top to bottom, so layers 4, 5 and 6 to go to consultation in July for the rest of the authority. if it's just too complex or just too challenging to do all of layer 6, especially for our largest directorates that we're designing for, then that may have to follow in September. But just to be really clear, we are working to a timeline of before the summer holidays start, so round about middle to the end part of July, but before we go into the summer holidays, to start the consultation on the rest of the programme. Now, all of that is dependent on those new structures being validated, being assessed, going through the organisational design challenge, and us having everything ready to start consultation with trade unions. So that's not a small task when you are mapping an entire organisation, as you can imagine. So there's a huge amount of work before we can say to you, right, here's the structure and here's the impact and here's the consultation business case that we're going to go live with in July. That is the focus at the moment. We will obviously want to share with executive and with scrutiny as much as we can before we start that consultation process, so you understand what's the impact on our workforce and what's the impact on our services. Because in particular, we're going to need to understand the impact, obviously, on service levels and the impact on our communities, as we are looking to reduce the workforce significantly, as previously outlined and as outlined in the report. So they're the timescales that we're working to. And as soon as I'm in a position to be able to say, this is when we can share it with you, we just have to be mindful that we don't want to trigger the start of consultation. So it's how we do that sensitively and confidentially, but ensure that you're cited appropriately as well.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
I was just thinking about the election now you've mentioned it, and thinking actually it's probably better it's earlier rather than later, because they've got more staff still employed at the moment. This is a very specific question, but with the voluntary redundancy, are people being expected to work their notice period, or are there arrangements or offers being made? Because that will have an impact on how that's worked through.
Thank you, Councillor. So yes is the quick answer. So everybody is being asked to work their notice periods. We are not approving any pay in lieu of notice. If an individual does want to leave faster than their standard notice period, then that will be at their request, but there will be no payment in lieu of notice if they do ask to leave earlier than the end of their notice period. And one of the organisational principles that we've discussed with the trade unions, which has been accepted, which we're pleased about, is that anybody leaving on voluntary redundancy, and also any staff that may be leaving as a result of compulsory redundancy through the LGR restructuring, they will still be eligible to work on the elections, because it's a separate payroll. And it's actually staffed and funded and paid separately to Somerset Council employees. So all of that knowledge and experience that we've got, those people are still able to come back and work with us on the elections, see this year and future years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Lashon. Oh, sorry, I'll come back to Councillor Johnson, then Councillor Lashon.
Just a quick follow on, is that being communicated with staff? So, people that are expecting people not to be around, suddenly seeing them, that, we're back to this thing of not employing people who've left. And the visuality of that needs to be really open, and everyone needs to be aware that if these people are working on the election, it's a separate arrangement.
Thank you. Yes, but it's a really good prompt. So we'll make sure that we go back round that loop. So all staff have been made aware that there were a couple of exceptions to the 2-year you can't come back and work for us rule. One of those was elections, and the other one is if they wish to apply for a post in our schools. So we didn't want to prevent that reoccurrence either, but we will go back round that wheel and make sure that everybody is aware of the difference and why people are able to come back and work on the elections team. But thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Lashon, and I'll come to Councillor Chilcott online.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make the point that the July executive date is the 3rd of July. So that will be moving to the following week, probably the Monday. The other things that we haven't mentioned, but they are absolutely on the risk register, are inflation and, of course, the pay board, which is connected to inflation, and interest rates. So they're kind of all on my list of everything that will lead up to next February, and they are critically important. External factors beyond our control, of course. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Chilcott.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the paper. My first question really is around point 1.2 in the summary, which says the Improvement and Transformation Programme brings together the activity required to deliver our vision.
Councillor Chilcott, you've gone on mute for some reason. We lost you partway through.
Oh, I'll start again. So within the paper, it says the Improvement and Transformation Programme bring together the activity required to deliver the vision, redesign our organisation, reshape our workforce, transform our services and deliver our savings. There's been a lot of focus, understandably, on the staff and the impact on our staff, and we cannot underestimate that. But my question is really about what's our organisation going to look like? The staff numbers seem to be the main driver with our way forward at the moment, but our residents want to know, how's it going to affect my services? Will there be someone to deal with my queries? And what are those services going to look like? And what I'm trying to get a sense of is who will be deciding what those services will look like and how many staff will we have in areas? Will that be something that as councillors we support or don't support? And in turn, how do we know what staff we're going to need and not need if we don't know what those services are going to be shaping and looking like? So it's a bit of a chicken and egg, but at the moment I've got no idea or sight of who and how those decisions on service delivery for our residents are being made. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll start on that, and I think Louise might want to add in as well. And Sarah, if there's anything you want to add in, please do say. In terms of what we're going to look like going forward, I think one of the items we'll need to bring to scrutiny when the work is completed is our target operating model. So that's really the pivotal document that will outline why do we exist, how do we position ourselves for success, and what are we going to be delivering? Now, that is a parallel work stream that's part of the Improvement and Transformation Programme. It's being worked on with engagement across senior officers, across the corporate leadership team, and with support from some external challenge as well, just to have a look at that. It will refer back to the original reports that I think went to full council and executive sort of at I think it was about Christmas time in December and January, where we outline the vision, the approach, the organisational design principles. And at the moment, all of the organisational design work is being checked and challenged against that list of design principles. But I think what would be helpful, and I'm not sure whether we've got it available yet, what the deadline is, I think it's still being worked through, but at the next meeting to be able to give you that update of the operating model so you can see the vision we're moving to. You're absolutely right in terms of how do we know who we can lose and et cetera, and what the impact is. I think I might have explained at a previous meeting, what we're trying to do at the moment is to look at what is the opportunity of having brought 5 councils together with the huge amount of overlap and overlaying of managers that we have currently employed in the organisation. So we know from the analysis that we've done, we've got up to 10 layers from top to bottom, with the chief executive being at the top and our frontline workers that don't manage anybody being at level 10. And an optimum organisation should be around 6 layers. We also know we've got hundreds of managers across the organisation that only have 1, 2 or 3 direct reports. And we've got that detail at a very granular level about where those costs are sitting. So what we're doing initially is not just looking through the lens of what do we stop, what do we do differently, how do we change our service levels. The very first lens we've looked at are those spans and layers, and looking at where we've got overlaying of managers, how can we target those areas where we can reduce the duplication, remove layers of management by combining things together or doing things differently. And that will take out a significant amount of cost from our workforce. With the voluntary redundancy scheme, we know we had 370 odd applications. We had 201 that were approved. We were very mindful to only let people go on voluntary redundancy where there would be no immediate service impact, negative service impact, or a requirement for us to do an immediate restructure. So this is where the service director, as well as the employee, overseen by the design authority, VR panels and myself, looked at every single application to ensure that where was the work going to go if that individual wasn't there? Could it be a post that could genuinely be made redundant? So the post, the budget and the person could be removed and there wouldn't be a detriment to the service delivery. Now, when we go into the next stage where we're actually redesigning the whole authority, it's safe to say that you can't take out the number of posts that we're having to remove from the authority to be in the region of 20 to 26% smaller, as we've said before. We can't reduce by that many posts without there being some form of impact on how we deliver services. So it will be really important as we go forward, once we've done all the analysis, to be able to come back to members and actually explain these were the design principles, this is the process, and this is the impact it's going to have on our people and the impact it will have on our services. But I'm not going to try and say there will not be a negative service impact at all, but I'm sure what you will want to see was where will it be, how will it be managed, how will it be communicated, and that is part of the programme that we are working on, and we've not got it ready for you for today, but it is work in progress that we'll need to bring back.
Thank you, Chair.
I think there was one other point, wasn't there? Sorry, Councillor Chilcott, in terms of who decides. The ultimate responsible officer when it comes to reorganising our authority is the Chief Executive as head of paid service. So ultimately, our Chief Executive has that responsibility delegated to him through his head of paid service responsibilities. He is supported and advised by the design authority, obviously by members, and he's doing as much engagement as he can with stakeholders externally and internally to the council to be as well informed as possible. So ultimately, that's where the accountability sits in terms of the practical process in how we decide the changes. That will be done through engagement, and that will include the executive and scrutiny as well.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just respond, and thank you for that, Dawn, that's really helpful. So for me, I expected to see the target operating model in place before we even set off down this road. To me, that's one of the first pieces of work, so I'm concerned we haven't got that. And also, just for me, it's understanding that dynamic. Whilst our Chief Executive is head of paid service, this isn't just about staff and jobs, it's about what we want the council to look like moving forward. And it's how councillors and the executive is involved in what that looks like. And that's the bit I'm concerned about, how that will be. What I don't want is to come forward with a fait accompli, this is what it's going to look like, so councillors don't have a part in that shaping.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll take that back to the team and we'll make sure that that target operating model is shared as soon as possible.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from members? I'm not seeing any. I think as we've heard, obviously there's a huge amount of work that's going on at the moment, working to a very tight timescale. As has been highlighted by members, I think keeping the risks under review as to how they operate across themselves and with each other is something we need to have coming back to this group. As you said, it's very much needs to be a dynamic program. So as we're working our way through it, it needs to be responding. And I think, as was just highlighted again, coming back to scrutiny with details of service provision and service levels is something that we need to be looking at sooner rather than later if we can, to get that feed in from members through the executive and then on to the chief executive, as you say, ultimately has the decision-making process, but as has been highlighted by all members, what the decisions that we take at this stage are going to have a fundamental impact on the public across Somerset. So we need to make sure that that involvement is as early as possible. So thank you very much for the presentation today, and we will look forward to our next update to you. I think we're having a regular coming to this committee because it is, as we've seen, a very fast moving situation that's got an awful lot of moving parts. But thank you. Thank you very much. Members, do you want to take a short comfort break, 5 minutes? We'll restart at, should we say 10 to? Okay, thank you very much. Right, welcome back, everybody. If we move on to our next agenda item, which is item 8, Treasury Management. And I think, Anton Sweet, you're joining us online to present this one?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Councillor Filmer. You will have obviously been present for the presentation on gravity earlier. There is a knock-on effect of the gravity programme in terms of the borrowing envisaged by it. When we did the original Treasury Management Strategy, which was approved by full council in February, the allowance to borrow for the gravity project was not included in the numbers. One part of the Treasury Management Strategy, in accordance with the relevant SIPFA codes, is what are referred to as prudential indicators. 2 of those prudential indicators effectively cap the amount we can borrow, and they explicitly need to be agreed by full council. And so with the addition of the gravity borrowing to our plans, we decided we didn't have sufficient headroom in the already agreed prudential indicators for this year and the following 2 years. And therefore we felt that it was best to come back with a revised strategy that increases those prudential indicators. That's about all I want to say, really, because the rest of the strategy is unchanged and already gave us sufficient operating room to deal with the consequences of gravity and a number of other sort of moving pieces.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Members, any questions? Councillor Seeb.
Yes, thank you for that. I understand the focus of the change that's required and totally back the need to do that. I was a little, I'd like your comments, please, on the movements in knowledge between when the Treasury Management Strategy was authored and adopted and today, because I sort of felt it as though we were adjusting these limits without necessarily having a refresh on the 23 estimates of what this year's interest rates would be and so on and so forth. And I did think that, you know, it might be, I was sort of expecting an update without necessarily changing the strategy, but just to inform the implications, because I suspect some of them are favourable.
So in terms of timeline, so the Treasury Management Strategy tends to go through quite a lot of places, and so it tends to have a very long gestation period. So the original strategy was written the week before Christmas, largely. So it was already sort of 2 months old by the time it was approved by full council. And I suppose it's a question of levels of certainty. So at that point, my understanding, because I until recently wasn't really very involved in the gravity project, my understanding was it was not sufficiently certain at that point that the borrowing had filtered down, or the need to borrow for it had filtered down into sort of other budgets, etc. So that's the timeline. I suppose in terms of sort of a general update on underlying conditions, you're sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't. I constantly get comments from councillors that reports are too long, and then I constantly get requests for councillors for more information. So on this particular occasion, we decided to just keep it simple. and focus on what needed to be changed. If you want an update on where I think we are with interest rates now, I'm quite happy to give one.
Thank you, Anton. I think really what I was looking for was for members to have an assurance that there weren't any adverse factors in that wider picture that is the balance of the change that's happened, neutral, positive or negative with respect to this change and the increased borrowing arrangement.
So in theory, this change makes no difference because both the capital and interest for the short term will be covered by the government grant payment. That's what's envisaged. And my understanding is if that's not forthcoming, then effectively the whole gravity thing sort of collapses. There is a limit to what government will provide. So if we end up paying higher interest rates, then that sort of does have a knock-on effect. And it sort of gets complicated. And one of the things that we're also looking at is the source of borrowing. We may be able to borrow from the government infrastructure bank, which would be cheaper than PWRB. So there's various moving parts on that. Generally speaking, currently today, borrowing is more expensive than it was 4 weeks ago, and certainly 3 months ago. The uncertainty around the election, the stickiness of inflation in the economy is generally speaking making commentators believe that the first drop in interest rates by the Bank of England is going to be later. But the flip side of that is that actually currently today we don't need to take any borrowing, and we don't expect the gravity stuff to sort of ramp up until later in the year when the interest rate environment could be considerably different. And the evolution of the interest rate environment is something that just changes all the time. It's the nature of Treasury, you deal with it. And it has implications both on the debt side and the investment side, and it's complicated and ever moving.
Thank you. Councillor Coles.
Thank you, Chair. Anton, good morning. I'd like to understand why there is such a big differential on table 2, page 98, in the PFI. In the 23-24, the limit was 79.3 million, but in 24-25, it goes down to 35 million. And then 25-6 is 33, and then 32 in 26-27. That's the operational boundary. I need to just understand why there's such a difference, then a very, very small taper thereafter.
I'll fess up at this point. The PFI numbers are the one numbers I have absolutely nothing to do with and just import into the paper because they need to be part of the operational boundary and authorised limit. It's my understanding that these are only historical PFI projects, and I'm assuming a significant chunk of that rolls off at the end of last year into this year. But I'm afraid other than that, I can't really comment.
Would you be able to get a written response back to the committee just to let us know what that is, if that's possible?
I shall do my best.
Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions from members? If not, I've got Councillor Chilcott online. So, Councillor Chilcott.
Oh, you got to me quicker than I was expecting. So first question is around the table on page 110, which is the liability benchmark graph. It is an interesting graph, so I've got two questions with it. Firstly, the grey areas. There's nothing underneath in the table to tell you what they are. And secondly, I would have expected it to change given the request in this paper. So that's my first question.
So this is the is actually a graph that's in the appendix. So it's a graph that did appear in the TMS that's already been fully approved. I apologise for the problems with the key. It's because we've just imported it as a picture directly from work done by Arlene Close, and so we've lost that. The two grey boxes together are our existing debt, and when it matures, offhand, I can't remember the difference between the dark grey and the light grey. I think it's likely to be that the light grey is our Lobo loans.
Fab, thank you. I think we need probably just, if we put that in again, just an explanation beneath it would be really helpful. But secondly, I would have expected that profile to change with our new borrowing. So will we see that in the next paper?
So
there will be some new borrowing which will extend, I don't know how far into the future. And even if it doesn't go into the future, the dark grey will peak up a little bit when we take the new borrowing, presumably.
It will, but the borrowing on that graph is that's already in place. So the only thing that would change immediately would be the CFR.
Yep. Fabulous. It's just
that identifying the need for further borrowing. And the whole point of this graph is to show whether, as is the case for us currently, we've got a much greater CFR than our current debt, indicating that we have considerable need to borrow more. Or the opposite, where at some point in the future, your existing book of loans exceeds your CFR, in which case you have a problem and you need to do something about it, because that indicates you would be over borrowed.
But that line profile will change if we take new borrowing. So my next plea really is we're going to send an email around about PFI. I don't think there's any explanation in the paper at all anywhere of what PFI is. I had another go through. So again, it'd be nice to
That's because PFI is nothing to do with Treasury other than it has to be included in that prudential indicator.
Okay, and that's fine. But if I asked anybody reading the paper what PFI is and what it means in terms of Treasury management, they wouldn't know. I don't know the answer to that.
I mean, in simple terms, when you undertake a public finance initiative process, what you effectively do is you create a long lease liability.
Okay, I'm with it.
And that is, in other language, debt. And so, yeah, it's part of the prudential code that we have to include it in our prudential indicators.
Fabulous. Thank you, Chair. Through you, my last question is, I think it'd be really helpful in the papers in future to include a benchmark with other councils. I know we do it with council tax, etc., but in terms of borrowing, I think we will be quite heavily borrowed moving forward for this particular paper for good reason, but it'd be just nice for me to understand where that sits in comparison with other councils. Thank you.
So in the, can't remember if it's the original TMS's appendices or the outturn. I'm fairly sure it was the appendices to the original TMS.
I think you're right.
There is a whole appendix on effectively the issues with benchmarking. So firstly, the data isn't available, and if you provide it without context, it's meaningless and possibly dangerous.
Thank you. I think we could say that of a lot of benchmarking. Thank you, Anton.
And that's why we don't provide it.
Okay, thank you, Anton. I'm not seeing any other questions in the room, so thank you very much for the presentation today. Obviously, there's been some comments in terms of how presentation can be done. One thing I would ask is if we can avoid too many of the acronyms. Certainly, when you start talking TMS, I'm going down Test Mash Special rather than Treasury Management. So it would be handy just for those of us who aren't engaged with it all the time. Just if you can clarify some of those, that's really helpful. But thank you for the presentation. I think members have got a better feel as to where we are on that now.
And if anyone thinks of a question overnight, I'm doing this again at Audit Committee tomorrow.
You know how to enjoy yourself, Anton.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Cheers. Okay, members, if we move on then to item 9 on our agenda, which I'll ask Ollie and Sarah to come forward to the presentation table. So this is the property rationalisation update. Just to remind members, there are parts of this report which are would be Part B items, the items that we would need to go into closed session for. The initial presentation of the report can be in open committee, but if we start getting into the detail of the figures, then we will have to pass the appropriate resolution to go into closed session in terms of the presentation. So, Sarah, I think you're presenting the reports. If you'd like to open up, please.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, so the reason we're here today is just to provide a further update on the property rationalisation programme. Members will recall we've presented to this committee several times over the last kind of 12-18 months now, given regular updates on project progress. And the particular matter that we want to talk to you about today is an opportunity that's presented itself in Taunton, specifically around this building that we're in today, Dean House. And we've, as a programme, been reviewing that opportunity. We've designed a full business case that was attached to Appendix A to this report. And then the confidential Appendix B, which, as you said, Chair, contains the financial information. The opportunity for this building relates to the first and second floors. It's a time-driven opportunity. I think it's fair to say we're working at quite some pace to deliver this to meet the commercial deadlines. And if it is approved, we would be looking to implement by the 1st of August this year. So just to talk you through some of the detail related to the proposal, we've got 2 office spaces in Taunton, as you're probably aware, which is County Hall and the building we're in today, Dean House. Both of those buildings actually have an oversupply of accommodation based on the numbers that we've been recording who've been attending each of those buildings. We're seeing regular numbers of around 400 staff attending both of those buildings together. Dean House has capacity for about 290 people, and just B block alone at County Hall has capacity for 720. So when we're talking about 400 people regularly attending each of those sites, those sites collectively, you can see the kind of reason why we're looking quite seriously at this proposal. It doesn't impact the ground floor of this building, so the customer services reception would remain in situ and operational from this building, and we would look to create some additional ground floor back office spaces so that staff who had a business need to work from the building, either to deliver services or meet with customers, would be able to do so. And we've been working quite closely with nominated change agents to really understand the individual requirements of each of the services to make sure that that's mapped quite accurately. The kind of proposed heads of terms also include exclusive use of this room, the JMR, and the neighbouring committee rooms for 2.5 days per week, which would allow us to continue to deliver the committee meetings that we currently do. We've liaised quite closely with the Democratic Services team on that point to make sure that that is workable for the service, and they have confirmed that it is. And really the kind of main subject of activity over the last few weeks has been a collective consultation process with trade unions. This would result in relocation of around 280 staff from this building to County Hall. Therefore, we launched collective consultation with trade unions on the 16th of April, and that process is due to close this Friday, the 31st of May. We've been meeting trade unions weekly during that process to make sure that we flush out any issues or concerns quickly and can react suitably. And this morning's meeting with them, which was another positive meeting, the trade unions confirmed that they are content for consultation to close on Friday. And following that discussion, we're confident that we've reached a position where we can proceed with this proposal. As well as the trade union consultation, we as a project team have been undertaking staff consultation. That has followed a number of activities. We have shared the business case with staff. We have undertaken face-to-face and virtual staff drop-in sessions to answer any queries or concerns or to provide feedback. We've also undertaken a staff survey, which has had nearly 700 responses, and that's seeking to understand what staff want from an office location, what they want it to look and feel like. That's a particularly important point for us because one of the early areas of feedback and concern we had from staff were just around that loss of identity if we moved from this building to County Hall, the current levels of morale amongst the workforce, and just the fact that this building is seen as being a bit more of a modern environment. It's more collaborative. And so for us, we wanted to make sure that any approach we took to design of space was a co-produced approach with staff. So they've been really engaging with that, sharing their thoughts quite openly. And that process will carry on. So each service nominated change agents. They've been working with the project team regularly to update us on requirements of their services and any specific concerns. And we're committed to continuing those conversations beyond the implementation phase to make sure that we can react and address any concerns that might arise. We've also been meeting with a number of employee networks throughout the consultation process to understand any specific concerns that might impact their members. And the feedback from those meetings is being fed into the equalities impact assessment that is being refined throughout the consultation phases. Again, they've been really positive meetings, and I think the kind of approach we've taken to being very open to that staff consultation has been well received, and it's fostered really good levels of engagement. Should this be approved, this building, Dean House, would move from a net cost position for the council to a position where it generates net income. We're talking about a 5-year agreement with a rolling break clause, which builds in flexibility for Somerset Council. As you're fully aware, we have got the transformation programme ongoing, and we need to see how that impacts our workforce and be able to flex and adapt to that. So this proposal gives us full flexibility to be able to do so. The business case identified a number of risks. We're confident that we've mitigated all of those risks, but we'll continue to review as we progress. Another important factor that we've talked about in previous reports around property rationalisation is around the energy efficiency of our buildings. Both Dean House and B Block have been renovated recently, Dean House in 2019 and B Block in 2021. So they're both energy efficient buildings and suitable for retention within our portfolio of assets. I think it's important to say there are a number of benefits beyond financial benefits to this approach. It's important that we develop a one-team culture as an organisation. We became a council in April 2023, and we're still working across 2 sites in one town. So that ability to co-locate our staff to improve the levels of collaboration is really important. The business case also allows us to utilise some of the income from the first year of rental to improve the working environment at County Hall, which will benefit staff working in that building as well. And we would retain the kind of larger, more flexible building so that we can adapt to the outcomes of that wider transformation programme. And it will also allow us a space for growth if we need it. One of the other points mentioned in the business case is around A Block. I'm talking about B Block quite a lot, but what about A Block? We believe on the current modelling that longer term, we won't have a requirement for A Block, but we need to implement this proposal first, monitor, review and assess the outcome before we take that longer term decision. So what we're proposing to do with A Block is reopen it in an interim period so that we can initially decant staff to that building, to allow us to take quite a gentle approach to the remodelling of B block. We don't want to be working around staff and disrupting them from their day-to-day work. So that ability to use A block whilst we remodel B block, we think is really important. And then once that's done and we move people into their longer term homes, then we can take a decision on the future of A block, but it's not really for now. So our timeline that we are working to, with the collective consultation ending on Friday, is that we will be progressing with a key decision report to executive committee in July. We're just waiting on confirmation of that date after the general election announcement. And our purpose for coming here today is, before we launch that key decision process, is really to seek the input of Scrutiny Committee to the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you for that update. You talk about bringing everyone to one site for sort of cohesive working and a sense of team. So I'm just wondering, are you exploring encompassing meeting rooms within the B block so that this use you're talking about of keeping meetings here can move across so that we're all on one site? I mean, presumably you have explored doing the ground floor of A block for the purpose and decided against that, but it just feels like if you're trying to build a team and one sense of place, keeping the meetings here just doesn't fit.
I think so. We would like to review meeting space moving forward. I think some of the challenge with B block for public meetings is accessibility. So the meeting rooms at B block aren't ground floor meeting rooms and would require access through staff areas. No, but what you've got is access that's not through a staff area. So you can come in for a separate thing and up through the lift, whereas with B block, you're having to go through staff areas to access the meeting rooms. There is the possibility of remodelling the ground floor of B block, but that will require additional investment and into the kind of canteen area. I don't know if you're familiar with the canteen area as you come in. It needs greater thought and greater planning. So we will be looking at that alongside the, as you said, the A. So there are meeting rooms at A block ground floor as well that we could have access to during that interim period. But we want to take a sort of holistic approach to the review of meeting rooms. There's a lot of other matters that need to come into that, including kind of accessibility for public, for staff supporting the committees. B block does have potential, but it would require that additional investment that at the moment we just don't have.
I still don't quite understand why we wouldn't be considering opening the ground floor of A block to host the meetings as opposed to bringing people to a separate site.
I think that the point of this proposal, we've got both options available to us. So heating and cleaning A block is a considerable cost, and when we've through a sort of decamp period and into the winter, with the arrangement we've got with keeping use of these meeting rooms, we've got the option of continuing to host committee meetings here, and mothball A block with a view to potentially selling it, if that's the course of action we take. If analysis and thinking leads us to a different option, then we can renegotiate use of these rooms and move across to A block. I think there's a difference between the kind of collaboration for committee meetings and public committee meetings, which is very much the use that's intended for this suite of rooms on a kind of shared basis with various other occupants, and staff collaboration, which we will try to redesign parts of B block to provide more space for effective collaboration between teams and across teams and with external partners, but in a non-public environment where the access issues and things like broadcasting sufficient space for public observers aren't such an issue.
So, I mean, you've obviously got to bring your democratic staff over here, haven't you, from the other side, which is a cost in time and resource and equipment being in two sites, or potentially being in two sites. But have you got costing figures on? Would we be paying for this access to this for meetings, or is this being offered at no cost. Have we got any details on costings of what opening the ground floor of A block would entail compared to what we might be paying here?
And we'd have to provide the figures accurately in writing, which we can follow up upon. But we estimated a saving of about £100,000 across the winter period from mothballing A block and the part of the Sheikh Mendip campus, and the majority of that would be for A block. So there is a significant cost to heating that building in particular. We wouldn't be paying for this room, although clearly there is an opportunity cost associated with sort of partial occupation of this site. So there is a cost of this facility as well. On the point around staff having to move between locations, I think that's happening already right across our estate. In fact, many staff are having to move between here or County Hall now, and that will actually reduce as a result of this proposal. So yes, Democratic Services staff will have to come over here to staff meetings, and officers will have to do that. But with a hybrid working approach, actually that has less of an impact on productivity than you think, because generally speaking, people are just going to a different office from their home rather than moving between sites for different meetings any more than they already are. So I think it's quite difficult to model that cost, but we don't think it's that significant. We will have the customer reception downstairs remaining open and a back office space downstairs for staff to use, either staff supporting meetings on the site or staff supporting that customer activity. And again, those staff will perhaps one day a week be here, might spend some of the time in B Block County Hall. They may indeed work from Bridgewater sometimes and from home sometimes. This kind of post-COVID way of working is very, very different and affects lots of different services in different ways.
So can I just clarify in terms of following up from Councillor Johnson, what we're looking at the moment is stage one of the process, where there will still be further review of the facilities in B block and A block and here to see how the best permutation can be moved forward. But this is sort of the first stage. Okay. I've got Councillor Osborne and then Councillor Locke. So Councillor Osborne.
Thank you. I think my points follow on very similar to Councillor Johnson's point, because when A block was mothballed and we moved committee meetings down here, I think we were told that was going to be temporary and it was just for the winter. Clearly that is now not the case. It does seem strange not to want to use those existing committee rooms here. What is the opportunity cost that if we use the committee rooms in A block or even perhaps some of the ones in B block, so you could actually let this out 100% without a leasing agreement for 2.5 days a week, what difference would that make to the bottom line, to the rent you would get? Because it seems to me as though, looking at the numbers, there's probably we're missing out potentially on, for space of it, 2.5 days a week of income, which could be used to remodel and maybe make A block, B block do that job so much better if you're looking at moving staff into one team. And as time goes on, that impact of, oh dear, it's a county takeover, will dissipate over time, because your figures now seem to be based on staff numbers as they are now, not what they're going to be next year when we've reduced by something like 25%, which is what we're being told. So those would just be my comments on it, that really we should be looking at renting the whole of this space out, make it simple, and moving everything over and making full use of both A and B.
Yeah, so I think Councillor Filmer's sort of summed it up really well. This is the first step, and with so much uncertainty around, so yes, the potential reduction in the workforce of 25% is one variable factor that we don't have information on right now. That's a projection of what's going to happen. There are others though. There is what's going to happen to the kind of operating model and the ways of working for the new council in terms of staff that are currently located in Yeovil, Bridgewater, or Shepton Mallet that might come into Taunton, or we might start advertising from Taunton. We haven't made those decisions yet. We also haven't. We've got lots of work ongoing with public sector partners about co-location opportunities, which could also include further co-location in a Taunton work base, which would have an impact on A block or B block. And we need to look at all of those factors and the options and the business cases and the opportunity costs for all of them. In the meantime, we have an opportunity in front of us to generate a significant amount of income and take a significant step towards that objective. And that there is no current need for a full-time use of this facility, so there is no opportunity cost right in front of us now. We're not losing out on any cash in terms of the current opportunity for maintaining the use of these rooms. As colleagues in the room will know well, this equipment to move it is quite that's the biggest factor really, Councillor Johnson, is the location, the equipment, and we don't have two sets of this equipment in Taunton, so that will stay here for the time being, but potentially be relocated to A block or to a redeveloped ground floor B block facility in the future as part of subsequent steps.
Thank you. Councillor Locke.
Thank you. I mean, as the chairman said, I mean, he said some of the things which I was going to say, but really, this is the first stage. You're going to move the bodies over there. Then you take it on stage by stage. You don't know with the reduction what it's going to look like with transformation. So you might have plenty of meeting space over there. You just don't know. That's exactly what it is. This is the first stage, and you've got to be reviewing your strategies and your properties and your business plan moving forward. And I think personally, it's a sensible move to move everybody back into one place to start with. Once transformation is done, you're going to get a better picture, see what space you do have, and you can't make the decisions now saying that you're going to do rent this out now, rent that out now, because you don't know. You've got to do it at stage by stage. So I am generally supportive of it, because updates will keep coming back to this committee anyway, Chairman, won't they? Thank you.
Certainly will.
Thank you for the report. It's very, you've got to read between the lines sometime, and you can't go into the detail of what's going to be the end game later on until you've got there.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson, and I'm going to go to Councillor Chalcott.
Yeah, no, I totally understand the logic behind moving all the staff force to one place and totally support that. What I'm trying to understand is how the decision to keep part of what the Somerset Council operations based here has been predicated on, and the financial positions behind that. And I'm still not quite clear on that, to be honest, from the responses I've got, because there must have been a financial consideration as to whether this was lent to the new tenant or not. So a bit more clarity on that would be helpful. There are things that we're missing by just having a meeting when we don't have the workspace as councillors. We used to have a room at A block, which was quite handy if you were arriving early for meetings to be able to go and work in. So this isn't as good as what we had as councillors when we were attending meetings at A block. Yes, it can evolve. Absolutely, it can evolve. But obviously, the decision has been made to keep the meetings here based on something, because that's part of what you're presenting here. And I'm not really getting a full picture of the basis of that decision.
Yeah, so I think in terms of the interest from external parties, the space that they've requested is the space they're getting, so they're not interested in taking the whole building, which means we were retaining use of the ground floor anyway. Part of the kind of next phase is looking at the ground floor as well. So do we co-locate our customer service provision in Taunton, for example? So we've got services like the library, the registrars, the coroners. So that forms part of a wider review as well. So I think it's a mix of the opportunity that is presented itself is for specific space in this building. It's not for the whole building. that kind of phased approach is not just about committee and meeting space, it is about wider customer service provision. And there was another point that's just completely gone out of my head. So in terms of the retention of this room, so one of the things we've done through consultation is speak to impacted services, and you know, democratic services have clearly said to us that we need this space for now. It meets our needs, the kit works well, the delivery of the meetings works well. So we're trying to respond to the feedback we're receiving from services, but again, with that view of let's take a look, let's see how it operates. It might not be the best solution for the future, but we have to try and deliver what our services are asking us to deliver at this stage.
Check then, the conversation with democratic services then, was that an alternative of going to B block or an alternative of going back to using the ground floor of A block?
It was just, what is their requirement, full stop, regardless of what location, where do you want to deliver meetings from at the moment based on the current provision? So
the current provision isn't A block, so are you saying that wasn't part of the?
No, but A block, I think, because we need to do that wider review of A block, the thing is, if we didn't build in the opportunity to retain this room and then that secondary review makes a decision to dispose of A block, we've got ourselves in a position where we've really almost not kept our, you know, we need to keep our options open at this stage because we don't know the future of A block. So if we were to not take the opportunity to negotiate as part of the lease to keep this room, and then the decision in future was to dispose of A block, we would really be short on meeting space. So the fact that this opportunity here has this kind of rolling 12-month break keeps all of those options open. We wouldn't want to sort of relinquish that opportunity at this stage until we know the future.
If I could just clarify that, my understanding is from what you said earlier, also A block is being used as the sort of almost the temporary decant building to enable us to move people from here over to the other site, whilst B block has to be refurbed to meet the needs that people are moving over there for. So it's the sort of 3 cups that you're moving around to try and keep people able to operate whilst the actual construction work and remodeling is happening.
I think to come back on the point about financial opportunity cost again, you know, over the next 12 months, there is effectively, apart other than a bit of heating, there is no cost to the council of using this space past the time. Come November, when the heating season starts, there will be a significant tens of thousands of pounds cost for using A block. And in the context of a financial emergency, as we did last winter, we will be looking to avoid that cost if we can. And that would require use of this space. So I think financially the right thing to do is to retain the committee meetings here with a view to mothballing A block again once the decant period is finished. And that's the kind of basis of our planning. And I appreciate that leaves members without the facilities that they enjoyed in A block, and we'll certainly be looking into what we can do, but we also have a financial emergency to contend with and a need to absolutely minimise cost.
One final go. Yep.
Yeah, no, well, we have to pay the heating and lighting for this building anyway. There is no separation of supply for this room, so a certain amount there will be an incremental cost for use of this room, definitely, but it's minimal compared to the cost of opening the whole of A block through the winter, or the ground floor of A block through the winter, and that, you know, that. So this is the least cost option.
Thank you, Councillor Chilcott.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the paper, and also thank you for the workings around the different options. I think it's really helpful to understand that. Co-location to me is a positive. I think if we look previously at Somerset County Council, our contact centre was in a separate building. There was huge value bringing them into the same building, and I think the staff felt they were sort of part of a team as opposed to separated. I think there's a value in that. But picking up on Councillor Johnson's point, the value you haven't added is you are separating your councillors, and the councillors are heading off somewhere else. And for me, there is a value in councillors being able to find officers, to have conversations with officers, to have a quiet meeting with officers. And those opportunities really are just not open to you, or will not be open to you. You will be walking into a meeting and walking out of it. And I think there is a value that's lost there. The other thing for me, which really doesn't get discussed, is accessibility. The meeting room that you're in now is up a set of stairs. It's not easily accessible for all members of staff to walk in or leave. I know there's a lift, but it's not the same as having level flat access into a meeting room. And I have noted that generally there are less people that attend meetings in that room than there would have been previously. And I think the other element to think of is you have staff in the room with you today, you know, as and when the move is made and they are moved to the County Hall campus, those staff will have to get from one building to another and back again, and there won't really be anywhere obvious that they can work and sort of utilise their time. You know, previously they would hop down to a meeting and hop out again, and very little time would be lost. So I think there's a number of elements to think about here. I welcome the changes, but I would ask that this committee consider asking whether perhaps meetings could be brought back to A block. I have raised it previously, and whilst not directly part of this decision, I think the conversations around the staff and the impacts of staff, the impacts on councillors hasn't been considered. I know there are many more staff, but councillors and the way they work in collaboration is important. The last thing I'll just mention is there's a lot of research coming out at the moment about staff, how they work, home working, in the office working, and I actually would guess that in times to come there will be a bit more office working, certainly in terms of mental health, certainly in terms of work done, and in terms of sickness. The evidence is starting to flow that sort of 2 days a week in an office seems to be the optimum in those terms for staff health and well-being. So I don't think the staff numbers probably are fully settled post-COVID, and I'll be interested to see moving forward whether future working patterns might see some more staff perhaps coming into the office a little bit more than they do now, but I think time will tell on that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any comments from?
Just picking up the final point, Councillor Chilcott, yeah, completely agree. One of the things that's really important to us is looking at what the organisational culture will be post transformation programme, and so we've been working with colleagues from the OD team to consider that. And part of the reason for proposing that we move staff to B block is to keep that flex. We don't know what the organisation is going to look and feel like. We don't know whether more people might come in. I think you're right, it's entirely possible, and that space allows us to flex to that demand and meet it, which is really positive. I think in terms of officers supporting meetings, the provision of the ground floor space is designed to prevent that to and froing between sites on a day-to-day basis, but except it's a really difficult one, isn't it, to get completely right, and it's why we want to review it and take that phased approach, because you can quite often as part of these projects anticipate what you think the issues are going to be, and actually something surprises you and it becomes something quite different. So that ability to review and adapt is really important to us as we progress all property rationalisation projects. Accessibility is absolutely a critical factor. And yes, A block ground floor is more accessible, which is why we need to consider it. That's important for accessibility for staff as well, and part of the reason for meeting with our employee networks is to make sure that we are picking up all points around accessibility. The intention is absolutely not to consider councillors as part of it. I mean, the proposal to retain this room was a proposal that came out of that service requirements saying this is what we are hearing and feeling from councillors. So if that's not reflective of what you're thinking, then we need to take that back and liaise with colleagues in that service to feed that back. I think it's just important that we you know, we take that time to pause and review and reflect before we make those longer term decisions that really will tie us down at that point.
Thank you, Chair. And just to come back, it's really challenging if you're online because I'm looking at the back of officers' heads. So just to say, I'm not being rude, I'm looking at the back of your head, but again, not ideal in meetings terms. So I hope you will forgive that, but the camera gave me no choice.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm not seeing any other comments in the room. So I think it'd be fair to say, I mean, I think members understand the need to maximise the use of our assets. I think it seems certainly the comments from members are that co-location is something that we're keen to see happen. That whilst this is an interim solution, this is something that we need to be looking at to move on. It's not a temporary measure that's still here in a very long time. I think there's something that I think the general feeling is it works in the short term, but it's not a long-term solution. So I think the discussion was raised about looking at B block in terms of whether there is that facility to have those meeting rooms accessible within that, because that would seem to, again, be the sensible way forward in terms of A block and this one being able to be then looked at in another way. I think so far I'm encouraged that the approach seems to have been very much on the practical and pragmatic way of what works rather than having any particular desire to hang on to a particular venue. So I think if that can carry on, and certainly if this is shown with this report, that as opportunities come up, they can be dealt with pretty quickly by bringing them back through ourselves and on to executive so that you can take that opportunity should they come forward. So I think I'd be fair to say at the moment, generally supportive of the process, but it needs to continue and move forward as well as it can. But thank you very much for the presentation and again, keeping us informed, and we will welcome you back when you need to come forward with these sort of reports, as I say, because I think it is something that enables us to respond quickly to the needs that you need us to as well. Yeah, the lift does seem to be a bit of an issue, and certainly that comment I think has come from members as well, is that do remember the opportunity that members have to interact with officers. I know at my dealings at Sedgemoor, when we lost the cafe, it was a shame because that was one of the sites that members used to go to and regularly meet with officers and have those conversations. So we do need that sort of space for that interaction because there's an awful lot of work that goes on outside of committees that can facilitate.
Yeah, so thanks very much for the flexibility from this committee of accommodating us at sometimes relatively short notice or putting us back, because I know that's happened once or twice as well. And certainly the points around member and officer collaboration are well made and something for us to think about as it evolves.
Thank you very much. Thank you, members, very much for your attendance today and those who've joined us online as well. The time is just coming up to 1:15 and we'll close the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Bob.